Our first witness is Mr. John Arensmeyer. Mr. Arensmeyer is founder and CEO of Small Business Majority, a national small business advocacy organization focused on empowering America's entrepreneurs to build a thriving and inclusive economy. Prior to starting Small Business Majority, Mr. Arensmeyer founded ACI Interactive, an award-winning international interactive communications company. Welcome. Mr. Arensmeyer, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairwoman Velasquez, Ranking Member Chabot, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for inviting us to speak with you today. As a longtime small business owner, I founded Small Business Majority 13 years ago to empower America's entrepreneurs to build a thriving and inclusive economy. We have a network of 58,000 small business owners across the country with 8 regional offices and partnerships with over 1,000 business organizations. We advocate for smart public policy solutions and deliver information and resources to entrepreneurs with a particular focus on underserved entrepreneurs, women, people of color, immigrants, and rural small business owners. We have created a policy agenda that focuses on 7 topics: access to capital, healthcare, retirement and other portable benefits, entrepreneurship and the freelance economy, supporting a skilled small business workforce, infrastructure and economic development, and taxes. I'm going to address the first 3 issues briefly today, but happy to answer questions about any one of those topics. On access to capital, it's no secret that small business owners face significant hurdles accessing capital. Small businesses' share of total bank loans fell from 31% in 2010 to 21% in 2016, while the average small business loan amount has steadily increased, making loans less available for the smallest businesses. Moreover, women business owners get nearly 50% less in funding than their male counterparts. Similarly, an SBA study found African American and Hispanic business owners were more likely to report unmet credit needs. New alternative and online lending opportunities have sprung up to fill this market need. This is a potentially positive development for small businesses. However, alternative sources of financing operate in an almost entirely unregulated market, making many small business owners vulnerable to predatory practices. This new industry must be built on transparency, fairness, and putting the rights of borrowers at the center of the process. A desire to encourage responsible innovation in online lending is what drove us to co-found the Responsible Business Lending Coalition in 2015. The RBLC has published the Small Business Borrowers Bill of Rights, a guide for responsible small business lending standards that more than 90 fintech lenders, banks, and other groups have signed on to. The RBLC has also produced policy recommendations for a national Small Business Truth in Lending Act, modeled on the law enacted last year in California. Other policy recommendations include quadrupling annual SBA lending guarantees from $25 billion to $100 billion, thereby increasing the volume of small business loans guaranteed by the SBA to $1 trillion over the next decade. Increasing loan guarantee percentages from 85% to 90% for loans up to $150,000 and from 75% to 85% for loans between $150,000 and $700,000. Dramatically expanding the annual budget of the CDFI fund from $250 million to $1 billion, and prohibiting confessions of judgment in which borrowers agree to, in advance to lose any dispute with the lender. On health care, since its enactment, the ACA has provided health care to 24 million individuals who otherwise couldn't access coverage, many of whom work for small employers or are themselves small business owners or self-employed individuals. What's not well understood is that more than half of all ACA marketplace enrollees fall into these entrepreneurship categories. So we must do 3 things: strengthen our healthcare markets, expand health coverage, and reduce drug prices while containing other inefficient costs in the system. Our recommendations include maintaining protections for individuals with pre-existing conditions, addressing the rising costs of prescription drugs, protecting consumers from surprise billing by limiting patient out-of-network cost sharing, blocking the extension of both short-term health insurance plans and association health plans, both of which offer inadequate coverage and remove younger, healthier individuals from the general pool, thus increasing costs for everybody else and destabilizing markets. Allowing people to buy into Medicare and or Medicaid, guaranteeing cost-sharing subsidies to insurers, and creating a reinsurance program. Finally, we need a modernized benefits infrastructure that serves today's independent entrepreneurs and small business owners who do not work for large corporations. We recommend the following: supporting federal efforts to establish publicly administered retirement savings program like the Secure Choice programs in some states and make participation open to the self-employed. passing the Family Act to establish a national program that would provide partial wage replacement for small business employees and the self-employed. And there are a number of other recommendations in our policy agenda. Finally, Congress must focus on the particular needs of rural entrepreneurs who start businesses at higher rates than their urban counterparts and have higher 5-year business survival rates, while facing a unique set of challenges. Yesterday, we released a report on rural entrepreneurship, a copy of which we will provide to the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on these important issues. I look forward to answering your questions.
It's a relatively new concept, but I'd like to get each of your input or opinion on this briefly. Would you be inclined to be for or against the so-called Green New Deal? Mr. Arensmeyer?
Well, there's no question that we've got a major problem facing us, and we need to take dramatic action. We have not studied the details of the, I'm not even sure there is sort of a document, so I can't say that we would support everything in it, but we definitely support the concept. And I think what's important to remember is that as we figure out how to reduce our carbon footprint and create more renewable opportunities, there are business opportunities, and many of those business opportunities are available to small businesses. So we would like to see, as part of and yes, there does need to be a comprehensive effort to deal with this, we would like to see making sure there's a role for entrepreneurship and for new technologies and for new opportunities for business, which we think can create a whole new generation of jobs in this country.
This workforce came up by a couple of the witnesses, and I know that when I go around my district, that's one of the first things that the small business folks or medium business or even large talk about, how tough it is to find good qualified people. Is that, and real quickly, Mr. Arensmeyer, is that something that you think is a real challenge, or what can we do about it?
Absolutely, it's a real challenge, and we need to have policies that encourage. First of all, there's a labor shortage now in this country, so we need to have immigration policies that recognize this and recognize the tremendous value that immigrants bring to our economy. And we need to make sure that we're matching, the skills of employees with the needs of small business owners. We found this particularly in the rural study we just did, where there was even a bigger gap in rural areas between the needs of small businesses and the population.
Thank you very much.
I wanted to ask Mr. Arensmeyer about this. I wanted to ask, what can we do to try to help alleviate these issues, or help entrepreneurship with younger Americans while they're still dealing with student debt? Are there any particular ideas that come to your mind?
Thank you, Congressman. We actually did a poll year and a half, 2 years ago of millennials, and we found that almost half of them say that their student loan debt has been an impediment to them considering starting a business. I mean, that's huge. I mean, this is a new generation of Americans, new generation of people who we want to continue to start small businesses. So figuring out how to get some kind of student loan debt relief is absolutely essential to making sure that we foster the next generation of entrepreneurs.
How can existing entrepreneurial development resources, such as small business development centers, women's business centers, SCORE, or veterans business outreach centers, better tailor their programs to meet the needs of underserved businesses?
Thank you. And absolutely, there are some great programs out there. We work very closely with the SBDCs, with the women's business centers, with SCORE, with veterans groups. And I'm glad to hear that in American Samoa there's a thriving SBDC. We need to get those resources in the hands of people. A lot of times small business owners, they maybe think they need capital, but they're not ready for it, or they need to do some things to fix their credit. They need to better, maybe come up with a business plan, better understand where they're going before they actually get credit. And those organizations can be very useful, and we spend a lot of our time connecting small business owners with those organizations. So I don't know, I'm guessing the Rural Micro Entrepreneur Assistance Program applies to American Samoa, I'm not sure, but that's a program that we definitely think needs to be strengthened. And we do need to continue to connect businesses with those resources that are out there.
Yeah, Mr. Arensmeyer, you talked a little bit about in your testimony about how we can bring an advantage to rural small businesses when talking about opportunity zones. And I think you talked a little bit about concerns that it may sometimes not benefit small businesses specifically, but rather sometimes just go towards real estate development, which is fine. But I think that we also want to, I mean, the point is to create jobs. So if you could just talk, maybe expand upon that testimony a little bit more.
Sure, Congressman. There's no question that investing in real estate is sometimes easier to figure out, to make happen, to underwrite than investing in small business. So what we don't want to see happen is have the opportunity zones kind of devolve into, primarily real estate projects and not enough support for actual small businesses. So there needs to be an effort. There need to be guidelines on, and I believe those are still being worked on by the Treasury Department, to make sure that we actually, a good chunk of that investment is going directly to small business. We're not opposed to some of it going to real estate, but we want to make sure that they doesn't end up being the easy way out in terms of underwriting these investments. So we think that's critical, and I think it's the legislative intent of the bipartisan support that existed for the opportunity zones from both sides that be the case.
Thank you.
But I want to talk just real briefly from each of, certainly the three of you all, on this end about what you think we could do differently as far as access to capital. Briefly, if you could, because I've got like an hour's worth of questions.
Well, we have a couple of, thank you, Congressman. We have a couple of suggestions in our policy agenda. One is to, we're going for broke here, quadrupling the SBA lending guarantees from $250 million to $100 million a year, billion a year, to reduce the loan guarantee percentages, and to expand the CDFI budget. The community development financial institutions are a tremendous source of capital for small businesses across the country, but they only represent about 1% to 2% of all small business lending. So we have a bunch of other stuff in our policy agenda, but those are a few things.
Ms. Parsons?
From the small business majority's view, what should we be doing to ensure our farmers and our rural employees and small businesses can thrive? Were there any recommendations? I know I really appreciated, again, getting to speak yesterday, but also seeing all the young folks in that room. And I imagine you all had some very interesting discussions and interesting ideas that came out of that. And wondering if you'd be able to share any of that with us today about how best we can support rural businesses and our farmers.
Thank you, Congresswoman, and thank you very much for joining us yesterday at the release of our rural report, and your comments were very enlightening. You've identified some of the issues. I mean, broadband's a huge issue. 1 in 4, I think it's 1 in 4 rural entrepreneurs say they don't have access to broadband. As I don't know if you were still around, but one of the people on the panel, one of the New Mexico Native American business owner, literally talked about, she has a home-based business, and talked about how she had to worry about whether her kids were playing video games, whether her husband was doing work online, and for her to be able to actually get on, and she has a floral business, and make orders. So it was kind of an interesting, although not very happy story. So broadband is key. Access to resources is absolutely key. I know I sound like a broken record here, but there's, just because of distance and need. Infrastructure is huge. I'm glad Tom's talked a little bit about that. Not only do small businesses depend on infrastructure more than most businesses on a sort of per capita basis, but there are actually jobs available for small businesses getting involved in improving infrastructure. So, again, it's, I talked about the Rural Micro Entrepreneurship Assistance Program. There are programs out there, but we need to do more. And, there's a whole list of suggestions in our report. I'll be happy to share that with the committee.
Is if you could think of 3 of the things that you're concerned about, from healthcare, infrastructure, debt, student loan debt as a piece of it, and one thing that would make a difference that we can do that will propel small business forward in the country, what would you recommend to this committee? And we'll start at the end.
Congressman, I want to just address a couple of issues we haven't talked about that much here. I mean, there is no one silver bullet, but a huge issue is health care. And healthcare is something that has been a tremendous concern for small businesses for years. As I detail in my testimony, the ACA has actually created tremendous opportunities for business owners, business employees, small business employees, and self-employed employees, self-employed entrepreneurs to access healthcare. As I said, over half of the marketplaces are serving, over half of the participants in the marketplaces fall into those categories. We absolutely have to shore up we have to reduce some of the market risk. I talked about some of the issues there of eliminating some of these short-term plans and association business plans that are, sort of balkanizing the market and leaving the rest of the market much more expensive and less stable. There is a functioning small business market now, and it's gone up. The increases in the market have gone up half of what they were going up before the ACA. So there's no reason to start creating, new markets out there. We should support the markets that exist. We obviously have to get control over drug prices and other out-of-network prices. I just want to, I know you.
And I don't mean to cut you off, but we're limited time. Ms. Parson, if you could opine.
Ultimately, where do y'all find that government is still getting in the way of small business? I hear this a lot when I'm talking to folks. And how can this committee work to solve that problem?
Congressman, I think there isn't sort of one big answer to that question. There are many cases where government is needed to help small business. We've talked about some of those in terms of resources, in terms of obviously, you've heard about the Family Act, about healthcare needs, about access to capital. On the other hand, there are times when government, maybe shouldn't, we should look at regulations and we should figure out how to streamline them. When we've done polling, we found that fewer than 20% of small businesses rank, regulatory problems at the top of their list. And in fact, the biggest regulatory problems that exist are more at the state and local level, particularly the local level. There's not a huge hue and cry from the businesses that we deal with about federal regulations. So again, I think we support the work of the SBA's Office of Advocacy. For certain laws, the SBREFA process. We're not sure we need another sort of comprehensive process on top of that, and we do need to look at, and you all need to, and the regulatory agencies need to look at each regulation, what it's trying to do, what the cost benefit is, and not sort of have a global sort of response to that.
The thing I always found in my
So, Mr. Arensmeyer, my question for you is, in your testimony, you highlighted some of the unique challenges that rural business owners often face. What actions should Congress take to ensure that existing federal programs are meeting the demand from rural small businesses that are looking to expand and move their products into larger markets?
Thank you, Congressman. That's become a huge part of our work, is making sure we're getting out and through our entrepreneurship program across the country and letting people know about these programs. As I think was highlighted by one of your colleagues before, a lot of times these programs exist and people don't know about them. A gentleman who ran a small business and didn't know about SBDCs until he got into the public policy world. We find that all the time. We find that there are things that SBA programs, there are SBDCs, women's business centers. We need to do a better job of communicating those to, and it's even more essential in rural areas because it's much harder sort of physically to get access to those. So we need to use technology. We do a lot of work with webinars as well as face-to-face seminars. So I would just say that there are federal, state, and local programs, and there are entities like SBDCs out there, and we need to collectively do a better job of making sure small businesses know about those.
Appreciate it. That's one other question for you, Sarah. You mentioned in your testimony, I'm not sure if someone's already asked this, and if I missed it, I apologize. You were talking about the different ways we could legislatively help small business owners, and you mentioned a buy-in to Medicare. I believe you
Yes.
referenced that. Could you speak to why you think a buy-in to Medicare would be helpful for small business owners?
Well, there are, it creates another option. You already have a whole sort of Medicare system set up, and certainly on a no-cost basis, allowing people to buy in, we think is a good thing. There are a lot of entrepreneurs that fall in the upper end of the, the subsidies where, they phase out at 400% of federal poverty level, which is about a little over $50,000 for a single person, about $90,000 for a family of four. And, they struggle sometimes to be able to cover that, to offer that coverage. So we think if there's another option to expand into Medicare, let's see how it goes. Maybe you allow everybody, maybe you lower the age to 55 or 50. I think, it's no secret there are all sorts of proposals out there around health care. We think we should, we think the ACA was a huge step in the right direction. We think, we still need to have the debate about how really to get to universal coverage, and that's a way to do it, to start to incrementally move in that direction, see what works, see what doesn't work, and create some additional options for small businesses who might be struggling with the existing subsidies.
I know that you have done some research. Have you done, in terms of rural and rural areas, do you have any information, either anecdotally or factual based, that tells you there are some concerns as it relates to transparency and online lending to small businesses?
Sure, Madam Chair. There's two sides to lending. One is the lack of access, so that creates the market need for a greater number of products. And we agree you can't solve the transparency, alone and solve the problem. We have to deal with the access problem. So we start off in rural communities. They have less access to resources, less access to loans than other people. And so they are going to naturally be attracted to online alternative lenders, especially because, they are online, so they're, assuming they get broadband, they're able to access them. And so the Borrower's Bill of Rights that we put together that we think should be enshrined in legislation, and we took the first step in that in California this last year, is, there's 6 points: the right to transparent pricing and terms, the right to non-abusive products, meaning there's an expectation that the loan's going to get paid back out of business revenues, not by taking another loan or out of the person's personal pocket. Right to responsible underwriting, the right to fair treatment from brokers, the right to inclusive credit access, and the right to fair collections practices. These are nationwide concerns that we have, and we really think that the Congress should address that, and particularly the Financial Services Committee. But they're particularly concerned in rural areas.
Thank you.
Specific to rural areas and small businesses. If this committee and the subcommittee that I'm going to be chairing, we're looking at infrastructure, what would be the area of infrastructure that you would prioritize particularly to help spur growth? Something like broadband, is it investment in rail? I mean, just pick one. There's no right or wrong answer here.
I agree with everything that's been said, particularly the broadband in rural areas. I think something this committee has jurisdiction over is we need to make sure that when infrastructure bill is implemented, that the procurement is focused very much on small business, that the small business rules are followed, the women's owned business rules are followed. There are a lot of, that's a great source of growth for entrepreneurship in all of our communities. And this committee can really take the lead in making sure that those contracts are focused on small business, making sure small businesses, and particularly women and minority small businesses are at the center of that, and rural small businesses in rural areas. So I'm not sure, there's a host of projects that need to happen, broadband, and then a lot of physical projects. But we would like this committee to make sure that they track the procurement on that.
Thank you.